Yep, he's whip smart, razor wit, fearless on stage and screen, risk taker, rule breaker, scene maker, news faker. Rick Mercer is finally telling his own story in his new memoir, Talking to Canadians. Mercer on Mercer. Lord have mercy. As we welcome Rick Mercer to CP24 Breakfast with book in hand. And here it is, the volume, the memoir. Rick, love the cover, love your work. Look, you've spent a career, right, holding up a mirror to society, making us laugh. What was it like for yourself having to stare in that mirror for a long time for the memoir? I mean, did self-examination reveal any laugh lines or scars that you didn't even know were there?
Well, for starters, I'm not much of a reflective guy, and I've always been lucky. I've always been working and moving forward and not really thinking about the past very much. But of course, when the pandemic happened, like everyone else in show business, everything was pulled out from under us. There was nothing on the horizon. All I had was time. So it made sense that I would write this book. But in terms of looking back and seeing scars or what have you, I think the headspace that I was in during the writing process, because of the pandemic, was I was only going to write stories that were funny. I wanted a book that was fun. I wanted people to laugh, and ultimately, I think that's what I delivered. And that's the most important thing to me, because I think in these times, especially when you walk into the bookstore and you see the table, and there's a lot of dark stories out there, and God love them, they need to be told, but there needs to be a place on the corner of the table for a funny story, and I hope this is what we've got.
Amen. Were you a class clown? Were you destined for this life of levity, or did comedy and showbiz sort of discover you?
I may have glued my hand to my forehead once to get laughs from my buddy Timmy, but I was not the class clown. And in fact, I can think of a handful of people in high school that I banged around with that I always thought were funnier than I was. But I was a terrible student. I was very unfocused, and I couldn't focus. And nothing worked for me at school until high school, when I came together with this group of real misfits. I mean, now I think you would say half of them would be considered at-risk young people. And we bumped into this educator, Lois Brown, and I dabbled with the drama club, and I was quitting. I said, I don't want to do this anymore. And she said, that's a terrible mistake. The biggest mistake of your life. And I said, why? And she said, well, because our next show is going to be entered in the Provincial Drama Festival. And I said, what is it? And she said, I don't know. You haven't written it yet. And I'd never written anything at that point. Great challenge. And this teacher kind of saw in me that I could write. And together with this group of misfits, we wrote this show and created this show, and I never stopped since. You know, I've been writing and performing ever since.
You know, I was heartbroken, but I fully understood when you opted to kibosh Talking to Americans out of respect and deference post 9/11. But you know, you used the formula comedy equals tragedy plus time. Did you ever reconsider reconstituting those amazing trips down south?
I talk about Talking to Americans a fair bit in the book, the genesis of how it happened, and then behind the scenes, because we were in places like governors' mansions telling governors that, you know, Canada's Parliament building was an igloo and it was melting. And we were, you know, we were on the campaign trail with George W. Bush. So many interesting places. So there's a lot of stories. I never really thought of bringing it back because Talking to Americans took on such a life of its own. It threatened to define me entirely. And there was a point where I had to make a decision. Am I going to keep doing this? Because if I do, this is what I will end up doing. And so it's hard to pull the plug sometimes on something that's working and move on. But I was glad in hindsight that I did, for sure. But the stuff holds up. I mean, I really loved writing the chapters on Talking to Americans and going back and looking at it. And you know, I still laugh when I see people talking about how Canada is legalizing insulin. I mean, that kills me. I don't know why. It kills me.
Rick, this is sort of outside the margins of the book, but the last thing I want to get your take on, you know, cancel culture, purity tests, virtue signaling, whatever you want to call it, all the pearl clutching that we see online these days. Can woke and joke coexist?
It's pretty tricky, and I haven't really dwelled on it that much, quite frankly, because I've been out of the business, the opinion business, and I've been off TV for a little while, and it's during that time that this kind of woke versus joke has kind of really exploded. But I can tell you there's been a number of times in the last 18 months or so where I've thought to myself, wow, I'm glad I'm out of the opinion business, because apparently you're not allowed to have one anymore. And so I don't know. I haven't really dwelled on that. Maybe that's the subject of the next book, but it's certainly something to consider.
Well, here's this book, Talking to Canadians by Rick Mercer, his memoir. You are a pioneer friend, and you're also a solid settler who's cultivated some pretty funny stuff over the years, and one of the greats of my generation. Keep doing it. Don't ever stop, okay?
Thanks very much.